Thanks, John. So a lot of what I'm going to show you now we've covered in various forms before, so I will pause whenever you want me to, but I will try to get through it quickly and maybe have a few questions afterwards. So we set this operation up, the Fair Carbon Exchange, nearly 2 years ago, and the idea then was to see how we could facilitate the process of people getting paid for sequestering carbon in the soil. Exactly what Blaine was saying, hopefully will happen in Canada with the tax coming in. And of course it's not a simple process, but we've made great progress so far.
Make sure to use some voice over.
Oh,
man, for you.
Kidding. Sorry about that. Maybe I need to switch hands.
I'll do it for you.
Okay, thanks. Yeah. So just go through the two. Next one. Okay. So the thing is carbon prices. Carbon prices are low. They're going to change. Let's just have a look at how and what the story is. Next, please. We're going to talk about carbon dioxide equivalents because greenhouse gases come in various forms. And in order for us to talk about, a unit, we just relate it to how much carbon dioxide it would be equivalent to. So methane, for instance, which is a big problem because it's 20 times as potent as carbon dioxide, would be 20 carbon dioxide equivalents. Nitrous oxide, which you get from your nitrate fertilizers, is nearly 300 times as potent as carbon dioxide. So we just use carbon dioxide equivalents. Next, please. So there are two markets. There's the regulated market and the voluntary market. The regulated market could be carbon taxes. It has, in some countries, it's going that way. Maybe Canada's one. But we also have a cap and trade where the government will say only so much emission is allowed from certain industries. And if there's more than that, they have to buy carbon credits. And those carbon credits can be, in the future, sequestered carbon in soil.
Jim, I think you better hold it a little bit closer. There's some noise going on.
Oh, okay. Is that better?
Thank you.
Sorry.
Yes, thank you.
There you go, we got it working.
Okay. So, so based on reduction of emissions, means that up to now, everybody's been focusing on reducing emissions. That means switching from fossil fuels, not using so many nitrates when you're putting stuff on the land. Big project, for instance, Walmart's engaged in with the Environmental Defense Fund. They are getting all their farmers to reduce nitrate usage because then it reflects well on Walmart, who can say, look how good we are. We've actually solved this huge climate problem. Of course, they have to say things like that sometimes. But removal of carbon from the atmosphere has not been really taken into account. So what's happened to the pricing is it's been impacted by low-cost solar and wind and electric vehicles. Because people can see the switch happening so fast away from fossil fuels, the price of carbon has stayed low. Another thing that caused this low price of carbon was fracking for gas, even though they're not taking into account the leakage from the fracking sites, which actually, if they did take into account, wouldn't be so good. But that's impacted the price substantially. Of course, forest protection is a big problem for pricing. Let me give you an example. Disney, Microsoft buy carbon offsets so they can say to their shareholders, look how our carbon footprint is good. How do they do that? They buy protection of tropical rainforest. And of course, there's a lot of carbon in a tropical rainforest, a lot of big trees. Actually, there's even more in boreal forests. But the fact is, protecting forests means that the price per ton of carbon dioxide is less than $1 that they can pay for protecting the rainforest. So obviously they can say, look how good we are without spending very much money. So the regulated market prices vary between $5 and $13 per metric ton, and the voluntary market between $1 and $15 per metric ton, with some exceptions. In Sweden, the price has got as high as $230 per ton. Did I? No, there it's come back. Okay. So let's have a look at what impacts are going to change this. What's going to make a difference to the price of carbon, and how's that going to impact sequestering it? We're changing from doing okay to we need to do more. Up to now, because of the big Paris meeting on climate, people thought we've made great progress. Because of solar and wind having much bigger impact than anyone thought, electric vehicles coming on much faster than anyone thought, they all thought, we don't have to worry, we're going to be okay. Turns out, not really. You all know about parts per million of carbon in the atmosphere. It's a way of measuring how bad the greenhouse gases are. And 350 is what we really need to have a stable climate. We're at 404 at the moment. That was as of August. And 430 is a tipping point, which means that we could get out of control. And you'll see now how close we're getting there. Target temperature rise, the international agreement is 2 degrees centigrade. Actually, the science now says 1.5 degrees is the limit. We shouldn't go above 1.5. Problem is, we're already at 1 degree. So we only got half a degree left. So there's, awareness is growing. Just to be able to see how fast that increase is, that's the latest data on the parts per million. And you can see how quickly it's heading for 430. Not many years left. The same with temperature. You can see 2016 has been an amazing year, by far the biggest temperature growth ever recorded. And of course, this just shows you the projected pathways of accumulated carbon per million, parts per million. And the lowest line there, the red line, is not one that people think could happen. They think the green line is more probable. Now that's going to take us to 500 parts per million, way over 430. So all of this is telling us we've got to do something else. So recognition that emissions reduction is not working, obviously, is a big factor. Trying to sequester carbon using chemical means has turned out to be too expensive. So there are a lot of big projects. Shell has spent hundreds of millions of dollars trying to find ways to sequester carbon using chemicals. How many of you have heard of the 4 per 1,000 program? A couple of you, right. So this is a program that the French government launched at the climate talks last year, and effectively countries sign on and commit to increasing the amount of carbon in the soil by 0.4% across all of their agricultural land each year. If all countries did that, we would be on track to solve the climate crisis. We have 25 countries signed on at the moment. Obviously, there are a lot of other benefits to sequestering carbon in the soil. You've been experiencing this morning. That's what we've been talking about. All the other things that happen, more people on the land, better quality food. One of the biggest things that's about to break is what I would call nutrient density. So food has lost its nutrient density by between 50 and 80% over the last 50 years. This is one of the major causes of disease right across the planet. And if you do this kind of farming, nutrient density goes back up to normal. So what it comes down to is, can we find a case for getting a special price for sequestering carbon instead of just the same price as people who are reducing emissions? And I would like us to consider that starting today with this group and linking you all together with groups around the United States and in other countries of people working the land who could create, let's call it a pressure, a lobbying, powerful entity that would get us the right pricing for putting carbon in the soil. Because the sooner we can get the policymakers aware of this, the better. But to do that, we need a lot of people. And so those people should be those who are going to be involved, because they're the ones who understand. So just quickly, you probably know this already, but this teaches us something useful. You've understood how photosynthesis drives the absorption of carbon, and the food is sent down to the roots, and some of the food is exuded. These numbers, like 50% and 25%, are average numbers, so it varies a lot. Once the food gets into the soil from the roots or from decaying organic matter that is left from dying roots or bits of plants, obviously the soil bacteria and fungi get working on it, and that is how the beginning of carbon sequestration happens. But now we must look at how it gets sequestered. And this is just a picture of the soil food web. Basically, it moves through from the bacteria and fungi to the predators, protozoa, nematodes, microarthropods. And each time it goes through a cycle, as Molly explained, it changes the nature of the carbon. And the carbon gets more complex. And the more complex the carbon gets, the more stable it is in the soil. So what we need is the whole soil food web in order to make sure that we're getting the sequestration of carbon, which will remain there. So when it comes to measuring sequestered carbon, we need some internationally accepted protocol because we want to get paid for this. So it looks like the Verified Carbon Standard, which is a Swiss organization with its head office in Washington, D.C., will probably be the major one. There are others. But with that, there's an important factor which is going to influence how we do things. Obviously, we need to do the right sampling. And that's simple enough, but they do have some strict protocols. You have to have GPS links to the sampling sites. You have to sample at exactly the same time each year, and so on and so forth. So there are these kind of protocols. Also, you have to use certain mechanisms for choosing your sampling sites. And you also have to have similar areas marked out so that when you take a sample, you can say these number of acres or hectares are actually being measured. So we're looking at this other part of the protocol, and that is that everything that you put on the land has to be factored into the calculation. So let's say we're going to do some something that Molly would be involved in, or like we heard about this morning, where there's compost tea being applied to the land. We've got to take into account how much carbon was released into the atmosphere to make that compost. We've got to take into account how much carbon was released in transporting it and in applying it. So we've got to think about the inputs. How many of you have made compost or seen compost being made? You've noticed it shrinks quite a lot during the process. Okay. Where do you think that matter goes when it shrinks? Atmosphere, yeah. It's released as carbon dioxide, or, as we were discussing earlier, in some cases as methane gas. We don't want it to be released as methane gas. Methane means that it's gone anaerobic, and that's not it's not good for the compost to be anaerobic. So basically, I just want to leave you with the thoughts that we should look at the inputs. We do require third-party sampling and testing, obviously. So obviously we can reduce fertilizers, we can use local compost so we don't have to transport it. There are going to be probably carbon neutral sources of worm castings so that you can buy them with 0 footprint. And cover crops you know about, sorry. So obviously what we're going to be doing is looking for resources for composting, looking for practices that reduce the carbon footprint, holistic grazing, no-till cover crops. And some people should start in each area learning the protocols so that as the price of carbon goes up, it's easy for everyone in the area to get that knowledge. These protocols will be available more and more and increasingly as everyone accepts them. But right now, it's just a matter of getting what we've got, which is the verified carbon standard, and starting to get used to it. And of course, building the soil food web in any way you can. So thank you.